if you find yourself arguing with the Zionist bots or brain-dead morons on the issue of Palestine and Israel, may this video be the only video you to see. Cut through the Zionist narrative with a lineated timeline of events as they happened. Like many of you, I've been aghast at the sheer depravity that has been on display in Gaza in the latest round of genocidal acts by the tyrannical Israeli government. The comparisons with Nazi Germany are apt. This video is purely fact. I do have a larger Zionist video coming up soon, but I want to prime that video with a timeline that illuminates the history of how a whole nation, a whole culture was erased. A step-by-step play of how a nation was deleted in real time in the span of a single lifetime. All funded and backed by us in the West too. Before I dig into the dates from 1897, the conception of Zionism, onwards, I want to preempt the video by asserting that people have lived in Palestine for millennia. Jews and Muslims coexisted there peacefully for centuries, so this timeline is not a complete timeline of the entire history of the region. I am starting from where it all went to shit, when Western intervention, dying empires and colonial settlers all coalesced and descended onto the Palestinian people, creating the horror we see unfold before our eyes today. So, let's begin with the key dates. Modern political Zionism, the nationalist movement to establish a Jewish state, emerges in Europe. The first Zionist Congress convenes in Switzerland and decides to colonize Palestine, then part of the Ottoman Empire. Arthur Balfour, strongly influenced by the Old Testament, a staunch Christian Zionist and open anti-Semite, issues the Balfour Declaration, pledging the UK support for the creation of a national home for the Jewish people of Europe in Palestine, despite its inhabitants being 90% Palestinian Arab. Britain occupies Palestine until 1948. They call it the Mandate Period, crushing revolution and suppressing the natives of Palestinian territory. Jewish immigration to Palestine grows. The Havara Agreement, a collaboration between the National Socialist Party of Germany, the Nazis, and Zionist organizations, is signed. 60,000 German Jews migrate to Palestine between 1933 and 1939. After the end of World War II, Britain leaves Palestine, handing responsibility to the UN, headed by Trygve Lie, a pro-Zionist who names the Israel state as his child. The UN plans to establish a Jewish state on 55% of Palestine, although at the time just a third of the population is Jewish. The Nakba, the catastrophe. Israeli forces raze over 400 villages to the ground and drive more than 750,000 Palestinians from their homes. Israel now occupies 78% of historic Palestine and ignores, to this day, UN Resolution 194 demanding it allow the return of the Palestinians expelled or forced to flee in 1948. Palestinians remaining in the land are placed under martial law, which remains until 1966. The Six-Day War. Israel occupies the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, bringing all of historic Palestine under Israeli control. Israel continues to ignore UN Resolution 242, calling on it to withdraw. More than 1 million Palestinians are forced into exile, barred from ever returning to their homeland. The Nixon-Meir Agreement. A secret agreement is reached between Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir and US President Richard Nixon. The US ceased pressuring Israel to allow inspections or sign the NPT in exchange for Israel to not publicly acknowledge or test its nuclear weapons. The Vanunu Revelations. Whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu provides evidence of an extensive nuclear program in Israel. In response, Israel tightens its restrictions to keep the program hidden and prevent any authorized international monitoring. Illegal Israeli settlements in occupied Palestine grow steadily, violating the Fourth Geneva Convention. The First Intifada sees mass Palestinian protests brutally crushed. The Oslo Accords. The US brokers a series of agreements between Israel and the PLO, intending to establish a framework for Palestinian self-rule. The PLO is, humiliatingly, forced to acknowledge Israel's right to peacefully exist, a huge concession on the side of the PLO. Whilst Israel recognized the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Authority was established as representatives of the Palestinians. Despite historic concessions by the PLO, Israel torpedoes the deal during the peace process. Illegal Israeli settlements double in number. Movement for Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are much more restricted, and a treaty fails to materialize by 1999, the deadline of the agreement. In effect, Israel gains more control of East Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank. Less than a year out from the deadline to their supposed peace deal, intentionally blocked by Israel, Israel's increasingly brutal military rule and ongoing seizure of Palestinian land ignites a second intifada. Thousands are killed in one of the worst catastrophes since the Nakba. Palestinian towns, refugee camps are invaded, shelled, and bombed. Israel starts construction of the apartheid wall, condemned as illegal by most human rights groups globally and the ICJ. Mostly built on Palestinian land, sectioning off 85% of the West Bank. Its route annexes Jerusalem and major illegal settlements, belying Israel's security justifications. The wall deviates heavily from the 1949 Green Line. The ICJ orders the removal of the wall. Israel ignores the ICJ, as it continues to do so today, and instead extends its nexus of control over the occupied Palestinian territories. They impose checkpoints, a mandated ID system, a segregated road network, house demolitions, and administrative detention practices, which include imprisonment without charge or trial. The apartheid state apparatus is complete. BDS is launched, a movement to divest and sanction Israel for the litany of crimes they have committed. The organization is still active, and you can find out more about them here. Despite daily settler violence backed by the state and military, the non-violent Palestinian popular resistance movement grows in the West Bank. Hamas comes to power, an election where essentially Fatah, the PA, lost, rather than Hamas outright winning. The election was mired with the perceived ineffectiveness of the PA and the Fatah party, in part due to Israel intentionally violating all and every agreement made with the PLO during the Oslo Accords. As a result of the declining confidence with the PA, Hamas won the election to the absolute delight of the Israeli government, as now vilification of Palestinians was far easier. Hamas did not win the popular vote. Fatah and other nationalist secularist groups, which together won 56% of the popular vote versus Hamas's 44%. However, Hamas appealed to the desire for armed resistance against the occupying Israeli government over the more moderate diplomatic approach of the PA-Fatah party. In short, Israel created the conditions for Hamas to seize power. They undermined all diplomatic avenues with international bodies and the PA and accelerated their rate of illegal occupation. Most exit polling records the voters of Hamas as frustrated and without any other viable option for their future. Armed resistance, after decades of trying to resolve the situation peacefully, was a more attractive prospect for the most nihilistic Palestinians. Not for nothing, and as widely reported by Israeli broadsheet Haaretz, Hamas was directly funded to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars via Qatar for years by the Israeli government in order to offer a counterbalance to the PA in the West Bank, and to avoid the necessity of establishing a Palestinian state. Make no mistake about it, Hamas was sustained by Israeli funding and of course the incessant derailing of any diplomatic or peaceful resolution by the Israelis in preventing Palestinian autonomy. After the election, Israel imposed the blockade of Gaza, subjecting it to major attacks, destroying their only power plants, controlling the flow of goods, including of water, food and medicine, into the Strip. The open-air prison of the Gaza Strip is established. Operation Cast Lead, one of the many controversial mowing the lawn operations enacted by the IDF. whereby short, violent bursts of attack on Gazans are initiated in order to weaken Palestinian military infrastructure. In these operations, thousands of Palestinians are routinely killed. In Operation Cast Lead, Israel bombs Gaza for 3 weeks straight, destroying 25% of the buildings and killing over 1,400 Palestinians, including 300 children. The Goldstone Report condemns Israel's continued war crimes. Israeli forces killed 9 crew members on the Mavi Marmara, part of the flotilla of ships seeking to break the siege of Gaza to deliver humanitarian aid, cementing their role as occupier of Gaza. No help is allowed to Gazans. Operation Pillar of Defense, another mow the lawn initiative. Israel bombs Gaza. 158 people are killed, 47 of them are children. Israel denies access by the International Atomic Energy Agency to inspect its nuclear facilities. They have still never cooperated with the UN or the IAEA. Operation Protective Edge, a 51-day assault, kills more than 2,000 Palestinians. 526 of them are children. Zionist operative and likely compromised by Mossad honeypots, President of the United States, Donald Trump, moves the US Embassy to Jerusalem. 7 other countries have since followed the US in moving their embassies to Jerusalem, unilaterally recognizing its illegal annexation by Israel. Trump formally ends US humanitarian support for Palestinian refugees expelled in 1948. The Great Return March, a series of demonstrations every Friday from the 30th of March 2018 until the 27th of December 2019. The protesters had a simple demand: for Israel to respect their right to return to lands that they were displaced from, and to end the land, air, sea blockade of the open-air prison of Gaza. Israeli snipers were ordered to shoot on unarmed civilians. 8,000 were shot at with live ammunition, with the intention of causing long-term limb damage and amputation. 223 people were killed, 46 of them children. Thousands permanently injured and amputated. All unarmed, all for peacefully demanding their basic human rights. The October 7th attacks. After almost 2 decades of Hamas rule within the pressure cooker that the world's largest open-air prison cultivates, Hamas staged the most brazen assault yet, an explosion of resistance that had been bubbling over decades of oppression. 1,000 to 3,000 Hamas militants infiltrated Israel and killed 1,200 people, mostly innocent civilians, and kidnapped 251 hostages. In response, Israel first enacted the Hannibal Directive, which dictates the use of full force against the militants, even at the expense of the hostages in tow, killing 41 of their own hostages. The Israelis then used this atrocity to stage an act of genocide and to finally destroy Gaza. Israel has since obliterated Gaza with almost no viable infrastructure left. 72,000 people have been killed, 17,000 of them children. 10,000 are still missing and presumed to be dead. Gaza will now go down in history from the darkest metrics ever. The cause of the most concentrated child amputees in any time in human history. They have heavily restricted the flow of essential power for hospitals, food and medicine to be entered into the region. They have created famines, bombed refugee camps, and those who are queuing for food. They have barred journalists from entering the area. It has been described as a genocide by the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. Most genocide scholars, of which most are Jewish, have also derided the actions of the IDF in Gaza as a genocide. Questions still arise around the circumstances of the event, with wide reports of Hamas militants staging multiple drills of their offensive before the attack. Not to mention one of the most heavily fortified regions in the world, with the most comprehensive and robust security apparatus and surveillance systems ever known in human history, to be breached by men in paragliders with basic levels of military organization stretches the limits of credulity. People have posited about the possibility it was allowed to happen in order for the subsequent genocide to be greenlit and the Israelis to demonstrate their power and unaccountability on the world stage. Over 10,000 arrests occurred within 10 months after October 7th in the West Bank. The West Bank is not ruled by Hamas. A surge in settler violence and military attacks in the West Bank since October 7th has resulted in the death of 147 Palestinians. Israel passed a highly controversial law authorizing the death penalty for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, convicted of nationalistic killings that the state can deem as terrorism without any legal basis of such. Illegal Israeli settlers are exempt from this law. Settler Colonial Judiciary Proceedings 101. The Israeli military is extending its occupation into southern Lebanon and attempting to overthrow the regime in Iran. All statements in this video are facts. This isn't an opinion piece. Since 1948, Palestine has been erased. They have been subjected to ethnic cleansing, settler colonialism, and a discriminatory regime that amounts to apartheid. They have suffered a genocide as natives of their own land. Over 7 million Palestinians live in exile, prevented from ever returning to their homeland again. Palestinians that remain face 70 laws specific to them that discriminate against them because they are Palestinian. In the West Bank, more than 2 million Palestinians remain under a brutal military occupation. Gaza has been deemed completely uninhabitable, and plans are being made to erase the territory in the Orwellian titled Gaza Board of Peace. You can support the BDS movement or the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. The full erasure of Palestine only happens when we collectively give up and stop discussing it. Show notes can be found on my Substack or website. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing below.